It's the Sports Take Lunch Break, brought to you by Office Essentials. I'm your host, Andrew Corns, and we're back with another episode. We've got plenty of sports to cover as always, so let's dive right in. Joining me on the mics today are, to my left, Stuart Hultgren. How are you doing, Stu?
I'm doing well this morning.
And right next to him, I've got Sean Jeffries. Sean, how's it going?
Doing well, Andrew.
We've also got Dan to the side over here on our producer's mic. He'll be chiming in every now and then if he's got something to say. Dan, want to say a quick hello?
How's it going, everybody?
Okay, in case you missed last week's episode, which you can find wherever you get your podcasts or on the Office Essentials YouTube channel, here's a real quick recap of everything we covered. We ran through the Cardinals Team of the Decade, some St. Louis Blues and NHL All-Star talk. We announced the winner of the greatest sports movie of all time battle, that was Caddyshack. And we also gave some opinions on the NCAA championship game, the Patriots dynasty, and more NFL playoff discussion. Gentlemen, you all have an overtime card in your hand in case things get really lively today and we want to extend the 25-minute clock another 5 minutes. Is everyone ready to jump into the first half?
Let's do it.
Okay, we're going to start this 25-minute clock and get right into St. Louis sports. Okay, so what we did was we put up a couple of Twitter polls to see what people wanted us to talk about first. And in true St. Louligans fashion, the Louligan Twitter community came out in full force, and we're going to talk St. Louis MLS to begin things. Stuart, you are a resident St. Louligan, so is there any news or updates you can kind of give us briefly? Just kind of on where MLS stands, St. Louis FC, just a real quick soccer recap for the city.
As far as MLS right now, it's they hired a CFO, and I think they're just starting in the initial stages to put together a front office, very slow pace. That's next up you'll hear about is the groundbreaking when that happens for the stadium. Expect to see that in the next month, and then expect to hear about team name, team colors. That'll probably come out in second quarter 2020 or end of first quarter 2020. And as far as St. Louis FC, the season's getting ready to launch on March 9th or March 8th against Miami FC. So this is not the David Beckham MLS Miami team. This is an independent Miami team in the USL now. And they're typically pretty big spenders in lower league soccer, and they're a lot of fun to watch. So it'll be a good game. Wear your Hawaiian T-shirt, tropical shirt to that game if you want to brave the cold weather. So St. Louis FC has a new coach. Ant Poulos, who was with the team, left to the David Beckham Miami MLS team, who are in their first season. And the new head coach is he's actually an old Scott Gallagher Bush Soccer Club guy from the 80s and 90s. Played on the U.S. men's national team for several years. Steve Tritcha. So he's a fun one to talk, ply into his memories a little bit. He told me about the time that Alexi Lawless debuted for the national team. Steve was one of the captains when Alexi debuted, so that was kind of cool. So he's just a huge repository of local soccer history from a period of time that kind of spans that Stars to Ambush gap, and excited to have him on board. He's a good coach at this level, so expecting more from the team.
So even though we're still a couple of years away from MLS, anyone who's listening that's a casual sports fan, definitely embrace St. Louis FC. They're in the USL Championship, which is kind of the minor league of MLS to a degree, but definitely support your local soccer for sure because there's a lot of good stuff going on in the city. Sean, do you have something?
Yeah, Stu. Some people might have heard on the news, on the radio, local radio, about the tax credit situation with the MLS team. Do you have any insight that you could share on that? I know that the speculation that I've heard is that despite the problems that they've kind of run into with the state, that it wouldn't really ultimately pose any sort of barrier for the owners, the people that are putting the money into this.
Yeah, I think it doesn't seem like it's going to cause any major delays, which was the initial concern. So this is the city was applying for tax credits mostly for the infrastructure that is being created for that stadium site. Though the city would have asked the state for infrastructure regardless of what development goes in there. It's just a timetable thing. So that off-ramp at Jefferson and 40 is being demolished, or Chestnut and 20th, but it is being demolished because of the redundant off-ramp at Jefferson and 40. and the reasoning why they were going to do it anyways for the NGA when that was being now that that's being built. So it sounds like it's going forward, and they really don't have much time. They're kind of pushed against the clock as far as it comes to stadium timetable. And ultimately, if they delay anymore, I assume, I'm not a contractor or a design guy, but I assume cost overruns will far outweigh the extra infrastructure costs if they, delay 2 months to try to get their way on this.
Sure. And, Dan, our producer, also wanted to mention ticket prices, Stu, are really inexpensive for an STLFC game. You can probably get them for what, under $20?
Yeah, they have a ton of great deals. They have a $60 ticket deal for the home opener where you get 2 tickets to the home opener, 2 whiskey glasses, and then 2 tickets to any other game of your choice throughout the rest of the season. So just look for the deals. They're great deals. Or if you just come to a Luligan tailgate and drop a donation, you can usually get a ticket from there if you want, and also some good food.
Yep, great atmosphere, good people. Definitely get down there and support the team this year. One of the other big things going on in St. Louis, obviously, the St. Louis Blues. We've got the All-Star game coming in the next week or so. David Perron officially got announced as getting the final spot for the All-Star game in the fan vote. Anybody want to weigh in on, were you happy to see him get it? Do you think it was due?
No, I think it's cool that he's going to be there, considering the games in St. Louis, considering what St. Louis means to David Perron, having come back a couple times to play here, and the fact that you have the coach for the St. Louis Blues who could potentially ice, all 4 guys on the ice as St. Louis Blues in their stadium, Stanley Cup banner behind him. I hope to see that, maybe even if it's just for like a minute. That would be pretty cool.
Like first puck drop, have that unit out there. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, I think so. And you've got TJ Oshie, former Blue. He's going to be there, which is kind of cool. Matthew Tkachuk, who's from St. Louis, is going to be there. So I think St. Louis represents hockey pretty well, and this should be pretty cool.
Is Marchand going to be there?
No, I think he just missed it.
I don't think
kind of like that puck last night that if you're not familiar, he just missed the shootout puck, and yeah, we'll put that up on our socials. It's funny that you mentioned Matthew Tkachuk. I don't want to go too far out of St. Louis sports, but a couple of Edmonton Oilers, Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid, had sort of said in the media that if he's on the ice, they're not going to be on the ice, and they'll just walk off, which I think was a really interesting standpoint to a quickly emerging rivalry between those two hockey cities.
I hope we see it. I think the drama would be fantastic for the game, and just exciting to see a little bit of spark coming out of that. It's usually the All-Star game is pretty subdued as far as that goes.
Yeah, and those two cities hate each other. Everything Alberta sports, they just Grant Fuhr did an awesome article about it in the Players Tribune a couple of years ago about that long-standing rivalry, and as Andrew said, it's kind of gone dormant for quite some time now. And Matthew Tkachuk reminds me a little bit of Reggie Jackson. He's the straw that stirs the drink. He's just I'm not going to use the normal term for it as it involves a expletive, but he kind of mixes things up. I don't know if I entirely like him, but he was one of those guys that if you attended any Blues practices when Keith was around, Matthew and Brady were always skating on the ice afterwards. So it's kind of cool seeing them professionals now. But yeah,
Reggie Jackson and Matthew Tkachuk. I don't think I would ever have associated those two in the same sentence. So there's Stu for you, bringing something new. Another quick thing on the All-Star game is the All-Star jerseys. We've all seen them, I assume. So if you're not familiar, they've got some black and some white.
I don't like them. I'm sorry.
Dan's not a huge fan of the All-Star jerseys. Basically, if you're listening and you haven't seen them, they are black and white, and they have what's essentially the music liner, and then they put the logo right over top of it, sort of as like a music note with the logo. Do you guys want to give some initial thoughts on what you think of the jerseys?
I think they're just too plain. The last time the All-Star game was in St. Louis in 1988, they were still wearing these like orange and black jerseys, which were still better, I think, than these sort of too plain, basic things that they're wearing this year, unfortunately.
You kind of summed it up. I would call it lackluster to a fault. I saw some people online saying it almost looked like a second grade school had the winning pick based on like a contest in terms of coming up with a uniform. They're just, if you're looking at the jersey and you're not aware that the game's in St. Louis, I don't know how you really know. It doesn't stand out as like St. Louis. I know the arch is on the patch on the shoulder, but you'd think the arch would be a little more prevalent across the middle of the jersey or something, right?
I would have expected to see the shape of it more so than simply the lines are silver, which represents the arch, which could be, anything to me. That seems kind of short-sighted. But
what about you, Stu?
I'm not a big fan, but in their current format, I think they're a little hamstrung on what they can offer. In the past, you could do East and Western Conference and kind of very distinct jerseys. But now that it's kind of split between divisions, it does, they kind of, when you cater to everyone, you end up with really bland jerseys, and that's what we get.
Yeah, I'll say this. I like them better than the 2015 jerseys that had that neon yellow-green color on them. So at least it didn't go that route.
They're not the worst you've ever seen,
exactly.
But they're also, though they're very forgettable, so I don't think anyone's going to remember them. Not a whole lot else to talk about with the Blues aside from they're on a really good winning streak right now. I think they set a home record for tied 9 consecutive home wins, playing really good hockey, top of the West. I think tied or maybe just taking the lead, top of the NHL.
Tied with Washington at 67 points, yep.
Do you want to quickly touch upon just general thoughts on the team as it stands right now in January?
I just think it's funny to think about last year, and you look at the team they played last night, the Ducks, who are just barely out of last place. 2-3 months from now, things could be completely different. So you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt. Yeah, they're playing great. It's really fun to watch them when they're playing like they are. They know where everybody is on the ice. They play as a 5-man unit all the time when they're on, and it's a lot of fun. But you never know. You never know.
Yeah. What about you, Stu?
I was just going to ask Sean and you guys, this team or the President's Trophy winning team, which one do you think is more exciting and better to watch?
I like this team better. I really do. I think that President's Trophy team, maybe you could call it more firepower. I don't know, more. This isn't even a word. Scoreability. I just thought of that. But just to me, it's more fun to watch this team playing as a team more strongly than that team did, I think. I don't know.
That's a great question, Stu. We'll pose that on social media. I'm with you, Sean. I was of the age that I really revered that team that won the President's Trophy. I love Chris Pronger and McInnes and all those guys. But I think this team, top to bottom, is much more dynamic, talented. When I think about like the third and fourth line from that team, they weren't great comparatively to. I'd much rather have Sundqvist and Barbashev and Steen on the ice. Whereas I think that team was really top heavy. Obviously, they had Pronger, McInnes, Jackman. I think that was his rookie year. Yeah, I think I'd take this team over that.
Not
team.
to get too deep into the weeds, but if you looked at like ice time from last night's game, the forward line, the forwards from top to bottom, it was really, really balanced. Like nobody played more than, I would probably say, 3 or 4 minutes tops, more than the least amount of ice that the last guy had. So you can really tell that they've got 4 lines that really click, and they're rolling them out, over and over. And
Stuart, you posed the question. Which side do you fall on that?
Well, I think the Stanley Cup changes everything. That team, in my mind, I loved them, and it was such a fun season. But I believe that was also the year that they lost to the Sharks in the first round. And that always will kind of put a shade over. I mean, if this team loses in the first round, I'll be disappointed, but they won a cup.
But they won a cup, right?
Yeah.
I remember driving home from that game with my dad, driving over the bridge, and I'm pretty sure my dad threw his jersey out the window over the bridge at the time. It was pretty devastating to be at that game and to see them lose that way after winning the President's Trophy. But
sure. Well, we've got plenty of hockey next week, actually. It's going to be our mid-season hockey review. So our very first episode was a full hockey preview of this season. So next week we're going to kind of jump in and recap some of our predictions, what we got right, what we got wrong. So we'll really delve into hockey next week. We're going to shift gears a little bit over to the St. Louis Cardinals. Stu, you were not on the mic last week, but you did come up with your Cardinals Team of the Decade for the 2010s. During that episode, we had some questions that kind of came up in conversation, and I want to get your answers on those if you don't mind.
Yeah, I don't actually have that list in front of me at the time, so I'll kind of have to do this off the cuff.
That's okay. So the first thing I think a lot of people were wondering is you used a very advanced stat called BWAR to kind of explain why you picked some of the picks you did. Can you let us know why you went with BWAR as opposed to some of the other WAR stats that we hear are in existence?
BWAR, I think, is still a little bit more standard usage when you see ESPN or some broadcasts use WAR statistic. It's usually the BWAR baseball reference. And I think it's a little bit more generous, which kind of makes it pop a little bit more. It's a little bit of a sexier stat to see bigger numbers than smaller numbers. So that's really just the crux behind it. But the reason why I used WAR in general is just it's supposed to be the most accurate as far as adjustment for player positioning per season, per era. I mean, baseball has changed so much over the years. It's really a crapshoot. But any tool that you get to analyze baseball, I think is a positive. So that's the reason why I used that, and it seemed like the most objective way to do it. Because I mean, otherwise I wouldn't have picked Peralta's season. I would certainly not have picked Rasmus. I'm not a big Rasmus fan. I don't think many of us are.
I'm glad you meant that. Was actually my next question. Greg, who was on the mic last week, was surprised by Rasmus at center field, and he demanded you explain to him why you picked that.
Well, the reason is so I did a kind of a little informal cutoff. The Cardinals did a lot in the 2010s, did a lot of platooning in center field over the seasons. So you'd get guys who I think Hayward played a fair bit of center field the season for his first season, but he played, I still think, less than 80 games that year. Rasmus really had the most games played in center field that returned any significant numbers. And I really hope that Harrison Bader or whoever in the next couple of years erases Colby Rasmus's name from Cardinals lore, because I'm totally fine with that.
Yeah, I was thinking, reading the list, it kind of struck me that you kind of singled out these individual seasons with that best B-word numbers. My approach would have been just kind of make a general assessment for the decade. But looking at the outfield, especially, like you mentioned, with all the platooning that happened, I was looking, I think, maybe at right field specifically, because you'd mentioned Carlos Beltran. And I'm thinking, well, Hayward's 2015, he had a much higher, well, not much higher, but higher WAR number. Maybe not played as many games at that position. But I would be hard-pressed to say anyone in particular was the best outfielder of the decade or right fielder, because they had so many guys who maybe played 1 year, 2 years, even center field as well. So
yeah, so it was kind of a conundrum that the Cardinals put you in terms of your criteria.
Yeah, if I would say three best seasons by Cardinals outfielders, it would be Hayward's first season, it'd be Tommy Pham a couple of years ago, and it'd be Matt Holliday from 2010 or 11, one of those three. I think those were the three best standout outfield seasons, but they all kind of, except for Holliday, Pham and Hayward both kind of jumped around positions. So I thought it would be more interesting to split up by position and not just general outfield. But in retrospect, that might be something I think I wasn't fair to Tommy Pham, but maybe that gives him a chip on his shoulder that he can use to his advantage somewhere.
It's always good to come up with a list and spark a little controversy, though.
Sure.
So, that was good. Dan actually had a question last week as well. He noticed you had Matt Carpenter at second and third base. It was Dan's thoughts that he really only deserved recognition at the third base position. So can you explain why the stats led you to put him on both second and third?
Well, he rotated. I mean, he was our primary second baseman 1 year. I think he moved second to third base, if I remember correctly. And he also had a season, one of the better seasons at first base for the Cardinals in 2010. So he was a Swiss Army knife of a player. He wasn't much of a player with the glove, which I think is an issue as far as that goes. But the Cardinals historically have struggled at second base. I mean, now with Wong, we kind of found that stable anchor. But I mean, who was the last second baseman we had for a long period of time? Was it Vigna?
Yeah, I would say.
Dan, does that answer satisfy you?
That satisfies me. It's just kind of a curiosity I had.
Okay.
And I don't mean to cut you off, Stu. I feel the same way a little bit because when you look, like I said, you look at the position breakdowns and look at guys like Matt Holliday was one of the only outfielders who played, more than 2 or 3 seasons in the outfield for the Cardinals. And my first pick at second base, I immediately would think Colton Wong because he's been there for 3 or 4 or 5 seasons. But you can't really argue with the WAR stat. I mean, you have guys like Carpenter who were performing at that time, giving you those kind of numbers. Peralta is another one at shortstop. I would have maybe gone with DeYoung, but obviously Peralta, especially that one season, I think it was 2013. I don't remember.
Yeah, I think it was. It was his first season also that he signed for.
It was lights out. So.
Yeah, again, if you're looking for this list when you hear us talking, you can go to the Office Essentials blog at rethinktheessentials.com, and you can look at Stuart's full list in total, and he gives some explanation to each position and why he has who he has there. Stuart, the question that most stood out to me when I looked at the list on the whole, and we kind of touched upon this last week, I noticed there was nobody from the 2011 team that happened to win the World Series, and maybe that's a sign that team in 2011 was such a collective and wasn't reliant on one guy, and that's the explanation. But can you just confirm or deny if that's the reason why nobody from the 2011 World Series team made your team of the decade?
Yeah, and I believe 2011 was, that was the great moment of having Carpenter out-duel, but I'm pretty sure Carpenter came back from an injury late that season, right? Or halfway through. It's all based on peaks, and that was a pretty even team. There are still a ton of great players on that team. Can't remember if that was Larry. Yeah, no, Berkman was there that year.
Yeah.
Berkman had a really good season. Freese missed part of the season or came into the fold late in the season, but he was great when he came on. Of course, Carpenter was fantastic. Blanking on who our full outfield was that year, but it was just a lot of very solid players that stepped up, but they weren't putting up like MVP caliber seasons.
Sure. Okay, that makes sense. That's kind of what I thought, but I just wanted to press. We've got about 3.5 minutes on the clock before the half ends. So the last thing we're going to quickly jump into is the St. Louis Battlehawks. I know Stuart's definitely on the call bandwagon. He's excited for football. Last week the rules came out. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to delve into some of the rules.
Yeah.
First reactions to the rules. Are you more excited, less excited, same? What's your overall thoughts on XFL?
Gimmicky. It's the first thing that comes to mind. The rules, to me, it's not football. I don't know. It's something else. It might be fun to watch. I won't say that, I'm not going to dismiss it outright, but to me, it's not football. It's too gimmicky. I know there's interest because people like football, and there's no other professional football in St. Louis, so why not have a team here? And if they get some fans going, that's great. I'll take the under on how long the league will exist.
I have a question posed over under a year and a half.
Yeah.
And you've got the under on that.
I'll take the under on that.
Are we backdating this to the announcement of the XFL?
No. So from week 1 until whenever, do you think they last a year and a half?
I'll take the under on that.
Okay, I'm on the way under, and I've expressed my thoughts on the league off air, but I'll express them really quickly on air. So if people remember last year, you had the AAF, which attempted to fill the void of a football after NFL. It filled this exact same time slot right around February, March. It didn't even last 5 or 6 weeks before they ultimately just shut down everything, and they awarded whoever had the best record the champion. I think Stuart and I, you have talked about as well off air that I think there's enough capital with Vince McMahon, and he's probably got some sort of contract with Fox from a television standpoint that they'll probably play out the year just because they're already locked into a certain amount. But I'd be completely shocked if they make it the entire year, then go through a full off season, and come next year they're still in existence.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious what Vince McMahon's motivation is behind this whole venture, because he's been here before with the same name of the league, and we all saw how that ended. We saw how the AAF ended. Why?
Yeah, I
Why?
mean,
Too much time on your hands. He's really bored. He needs to be.
Is he laundering money through the XFL because he needs to somehow lose $100 million?
so I don't know if either of you guys have seen ESPN ran a 30 for 30 on the XFL probably 6 months to a year ago. It was really fascinating, and I think Vince is the type of guy that he's so confident in his convictions and what he does that I think he was so upset at failure that he feels like this is an opportunity to correct one of the few failures in his life as he views it. And so that's his sole motivation, is just to last long enough to say it wasn't a failure, probably.
Yeah, I think he just wants to have another opportunity to be the subject of some new memes. That's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, in the very least, competition is positive for the NFL, and it'll push them to improve and not be complacent. So if the XFL gains enough attention and creates change in the NFL, I think it'll be net positive for American sports fans.
Yeah, I mean, there's some cool rules in there, but there's also a lot, like you said, Sean, that are really gimmicky, and I just don't know how they're going to fly. And I feel really bad for the refs trying to have to figure all of this stuff out.
I think it'll be a nightmare.
Well, that is the time on this half.
Time's up. Just before time, if I can sneak in there for a few seconds. Man. Our outfield in 11 was Alan Craig, Matt Holliday, Lance Berkman, John Jay, Colby Rasmussen, Shane Robinson. So that tells me a lot that we did
by committee.
By committee, yeah. So that's probably why the stats are like how
Good point. Thanks for jumping in on that, Dan. Yep. Well, I don't see any overtime cards being played, so we're not going to add 5 minutes to the clock. Before we switch gears really quickly and go around the sports world, here's a quick message from Office Essentials.
This is Emily from Office Essentials. Did you know that germs on hands can be transferred up to 7 times, making frequently touched surfaces in the office hotspots for viruses? And a virus can spread through an entire office in just a few hours. Some germs can even live for days on hard surfaces. So hotspots like door handles, keyboards, light switches, desktops, and even elevator buttons should be cleaned even more often. And don't forget about the kitchen. Breakrooms have some of the germiest surfaces in the entire office. Sink faucets, microwaves, and refrigerator handles too. Office Essentials can help you protect your office from sickness this flu season. Right now at STLOfficeSupplies.com, we're offering a free printable poster that you can print and hang around your office. It contains tips to help coworkers prevent the spread of the flu. Office Essentials is your hometown supplier of all the office supplies and furniture you need to run and grow your business. Learn more today at STLOfficeSupplies.com.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. Now that we've covered everything locally here in St. Louis, we're going to zoom out and go into the full sports world. Again, we put up a Twitter poll to see what people wanted to talk about the most. And again, that Twitter soccer community comes out in full force, and we're going to open with Liverpool versus Manchester United. They're going to play Sunday at 10:30. So let's get the 25-minute clock going for the second half right now. Stuart, Liverpool versus Manchester United. You and I are both big soccer fans. We've got Sean in here, who's probably more of a casual soccer fan. I think that's fair to say, Sean.
Yeah, I'm new to the fandom, and I'm trying to get more interested and involved.
So you're not going to have to convince Stuart or myself to want to watch this game. But Stuart, for anyone listening that's maybe in Sean's seat that's kind of casual to it, why should they care about this match in terms of the context of this season historically between the two clubs? Just kind of quickly fill us in.
I'd say as a casual or just someone who's interested, it's a fun match to watch just because it's a spectacle. If you watch, I mean, everyone watches the Super Bowl even if they don't care about the NFL. I mean, I don't care about the NFL, but I'll watch the Super Bowl. Liverpool versus United is one of the oldest sporting events as far as worldwide, and it just goes way back. This year, United has a small chance to be a spoiler, which Liverpool had the chance for a few years for a while. But if you're a St. Louis local, it's fun to go to a place like the Amsterdam during an event like this. I'll be there on Sunday. I won't be cheering against United. I'll be cheering for Liverpool, but generally I'm a neutral. So it's just fun seeing the two fan bases interact. And if you're on Twitter, you can see kind of how things fly back and forth. And so as a casual fan, it'd be like watching a Yankees-Red Sox game as someone who doesn't care. It's just kind of interesting seeing what might happen.
Is this a dangerous situation for someone who maybe doesn't have a side, or maybe you have a side, and if let's say I go to the Amsterdam to have a drink with you on Sunday, and I'm kind of in the middle, and I don't know, maybe I'm following along, probably rooting against United because my friends are Liverpool backers, but is there a chance of like making somebody really mad about who you're picking in that game?
No, and Liverpool is also going to be the slightly larger faction at the Amsterdam, so I mean,
I'd say
not that that's really a case. If you're in the UK, you might want to. It's kind of like Blues Blackhawks. If you're in Chicago or in St. Louis and you're a Blackhawks fan, maybe you're not mouthing off to a group of 30 drunken Blues fans or something.
Yeah.
But
they have a punch a United fan in the face day or something like that.
No, I mean
that's every day as a Liverpool supporter. Trust me.
These two groups snipe back and forth, but they're friends, and on Twitter they'll kind of mock each other, and there have been some friendships that have died because of this game, but no people.
There's a
locally.
Yeah, as a Liverpool supporter, I think there's a sense of mutual respect between the two sets of supporters, because unlike a Manchester City, who I think both United and Liverpool supporters really adamantly hate, there's a sense of respect in that when I look at Manchester United and the team that they built and the dominance, I can appreciate how they did it. They did it the right way. They built through the academy, brought up a bunch of young players. So the reason I hate Manchester United is because I always envied them. And it's funny, Stuart, you sort of mentioned the role reversal. For a lot of years over the last 15 or 20 years, it was always United at the top of the table. And the big game for Liverpool was always that game against United to try to stop them from winning the title. And that's how it feels on Sunday, is that Liverpool are cruising to the title right now, and United are actually the only team of the 21 games that Liverpool have played. They've won 20. United are the only team to prevent them from beating them. So basically, United can go in and really kind of crash the party. And if they were to win or draw and say, "Hey, Liverpool, you guys beat everybody on your way to the title, but not us," that's kind of a huge feather in their cap. So
sure.
I think everyone should be watching the game, but I also think, to Stuart's point, sometimes the magnitude of the game can affect the quality of the game. And quite often, Liverpool United matches aren't always the most thrilling games. You could probably find like an Arsenal Spurs or something a little lower on the register. But oftentimes when you watch the Super Bowl is not the most compelling game. It just happens to be two really good teams. And I think that's kind of the way with Liverpool United, where there's so much build-up for a week, and then by the time the game happens, it's actually a lot less exciting. They actually played a 1-1 draw in the previous round, so that's kind of what you're going to get, I think.
Yeah, and I would say in a vacuum, Liverpool being historically good as they are and dominant, if they were playing a team that was United's level, say some team in the Champions League that's kind of mid-table, I mean, Liverpool could win the game 5-0 and not break a sweat. But since it's United and they're going to be up for it, I assume it'll be much closer, though. I mean, I would be surprised if United won. A draw wouldn't surprise me terribly, but I think the smart bet's on a 2 or 3 goal win by Liverpool.
And I kind of agree with Stu. I think of the 20 matches that Liverpool have won this season, 10 of those were by 1 goal. So they're kind of just cruising along, winning these close games and managing and controlling the game. So I kind of see another 2-1 Liverpool, but I think a draw is also a very likely scenario.
Man U's the only one that's drawn us this year, correct?
Correct, yeah.
So they're the only ones that get taken points away from Liverpool.
Yeah,
so.
But they will be at Anfield, which is the home of Liverpool, so the crowd's going to be into it. It's going to be a huge atmosphere. So from a casual standpoint, Sean, I would say if you turn it on, you're going to get so much in terms of atmosphere and emotion that even though maybe the on-field product isn't as fluid as some matches can be, I think there's so much emotion and drama and storyline in the game that it's really worth watching.
Yeah, and some background for people not aware, Liverpool and Manchester are very close together by American standards.
About 30 miles.
Yeah, 30 miles away. You have players who play for Liverpool who live in Manchester and vice versa. So for English standards, they're not the closest because you have clubs that are literally less than a mile away from each other, 3 or 4 miles away from each other in some cities. But as by American standards, this would be like if St. Charles had a big team and St. Louis had a big team.
It'd be like if the Cubs were in St. Charles and not Chicago.
Yeah.
You've got that rivalry and that close of proximity. So for any casuals out there, I'd definitely say set your television 10:30 on NBC Sports Sunday because that's a big game.
Yeah, I would say the times, the the air times is one of the things that keeps me from watching a lot of, say, Premier League games, for example. But you've convinced me that I should be watching on Sunday. So.
Good. Well, thank you.
Well done.
Yeah. Next thing we're going to get into is we're recording this on Tuesday. So yesterday was the big NCAA championship between LSU and Clemson. LSU ultimately won 42-25. Joe Burrow made big history. He had the most passing touchdowns in a season with 60. He had the most passing yards in a game with 463 in a championship game. LSU are the first team ever to beat the top 4 in the AP preseason poll. They're actually the first SEC team to ever go 15-0. So tons of records just happened all the way throughout the season and last night. Did you guys watch the game?
I saw the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
Stuart, I know you're pretty anti-football right now.
Well, on college football, I'm still a bit sore about the Mizzou bowl ban. But I didn't. I was actually watching the Blues game, and I was fully immersed in that game, which was, to me, very entertaining. But I think I might be the only person in America who didn't watch it.
Well, I admit I had a horse in the race. I have a friend who's a Clemson alum, and so I was rooting for Clemson. But very quickly in that game, even though Clemson scored first and it was close, Joe Burrow started – I haven't watched enough LSU games over the course of the year, so I didn't really know much more than a lot of the headlines and things. Joe Burrow is an elite quarterback, and he was making throws down the sidelines that were stunning.
Yeah, he's elite now. But as Andrew noted off air, when the Bengals get a hold of him, he
yes, he's going to the Bengals. They have the number 1 overall pick. It's a foregone conclusion at this point, and then he's in Albatross in Cincinnati for the rest of
Which
his
is kind of funny because he's sort of a cast off from Ohio State, where he didn't have that sort of success that he's had here at LSU. And it's easy to say now. I would have picked LSU to win this game had I thought to choose a team before it started, but yeah, it was impressive to see his performance for sure.
Yeah, and then Clemson, they've made the last 2 championships. They won last year. They've got Trevor Lawrence, who's their quarterback, who's actually returning for his junior season next year. So they're already definitely the betting favorite as of this morning to win the championship next year. They're basically bringing that full team back intact. So Clemson's going to be a monster going forward. Next up, NFL playoffs. There's a lot of things that happened over the course of the playoff weekend. Most importantly, and also because we are in the Missouri area, the Kansas City Chiefs got a lot of press, and rightly so. First off, did you guys watch any NFL playoffs over the course of the weekend casually?
Just a little bit here and there.
Okay.
Flipped the channel on, flipped it off.
Stuart, again, I know you're kind of against the NFL, but did you maybe kind of keep an eye on what's going on?
I kept a close eye on it, seeing the score, but I was actually binge watching some anime on Sundays. So
definitely the only person in America binge watching anime over NFL playoffs. That's for sure.
Probably. Well, I was with 4 other people, so there were 5 of us total doing that. So,
well, I'm also not like the biggest NFL guy. It's not my sport of choice, but I find myself being more and more compelled to want to watch, specifically because of Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes, both who played over the weekend. One showed up, one not necessarily so much.
I have to say, listening to last week's show, kind of after the fact, I was kind of chuckling to myself that so many of you picked the Ravens, and just thinking, man, that didn't age well.
It didn't, and even more to that point is when we brought up the sort of philosophical question of if you're a GM, are you taking Mahomes or Lamar Jackson? The overall votes were 67% in the favor of Mahomes. But on Facebook, you can actually remove your vote and change it. And I have a feeling there were a lot of people doing that over the course of Sunday.
Really?
Yeah. Yes.
I'm sticking to Lamar. I will say that.
So, yeah, please defend. Why did you pick Lamar, and why are you sticking with that?
It's more of a feeling. It's more of a feeling. I like his legs. I like his versatility. Not saying that Mahomes doesn't have the same, but it's not as showcased. Mahomes is a better throwing quarterback, I think. But right now, we're in that what do you call it, the veer. When you run the veer, you have the option. So I just think I like the option quarterback. So that's why I went with him.
Andrew and I were talking about this the other day or last week, kind of off the air, and Andrew, I think busted out the logic and convinced me that if you're looking at building a franchise with a guy, that Lamar Jackson maybe isn't the guy who's going to give you the same kind of longevity that a Patrick Mahomes will. I thought, Andrew, I don't want to steal your thunder, but you made a really great point about Jackson runs the ball a lot more.
Which makes him a lot more susceptible to injury.
Exactly. I mean, he's potentially could wear down much more quickly, where you have Mahomes, who is, probably as athletic as Jackson, but tends to stay in a more traditional pocket passing situation. So
yeah, and the other thing is, there's this perception that Patrick Mahomes is this running quarterback, and he really isn't. He just also happens to be so athletic that he can run when he needs to be, and that really impresses me. Is that he manages the game in a different way. Lamar's still too raw for me right now. I mean, his instinct's almost to run still, and that's a dangerous thing. If I'm looking at it from the perspective of being a general manager that's trying to build a team for a decade, there's a good chance Lamar Jackson could win a Super Bowl in the next 3 or 4 years, but then also be out of the league in 5 years from a knee injury or something like that.
Absolutely.
Mahomes, I feel like he's got 12, 15 solid years, kind of, like an Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers doesn't get enough credit for how mobile he can be, and I sort of see Mahomes in that regard where he's just really mobile. But he's also changing the game in terms of, it was funny to watch Twitter during the course of the game. So it's 21-0, and people are quickly jumping off the Chiefs bandwagon. And I kind of told my wife, I said, this Mahomes and the Chiefs remind me of the Warriors and Steph Curry, in that oftentimes during that 5-year run, the Warriors would go down 20, 25 points, and you always knew come third quarter they were just going to put it on a team and score 40 and out of nowhere, and then all of a sudden the Warriors were up because they were so high-powered that no lead was safe. And that's kind of how I felt with Mahomes. It's like, are we writing him off after one quarter? Because once that Chiefs team gets going, they can – you saw what happened. I mean, they put up, 24, 28 points within, a 5-6 minute spell. They ended up spotting the Texans a quarter and 21 points and still put up 50 and still won by 20. They're the real deal, and they're going to be hard to beat in terms of getting to the Super Bowl.
I think it's going to be a really good matchup, even not having followed the season that much, to have Ryan Tannehill with Tennessee, who's kind of come out of nowhere. I mean, not really. Look at where Tennessee finished the season, and then what he did in that game against the Ravens, who you think Ravens defense is really good. Tannehill pretty much picked them apart.
And even the week prior against New England, they took down the Patriots and the Ravens back to back.
So you have to give credit to the team who beat the Patriots. Obviously, I think that was talked about a little bit. Just interesting. I think that the last time the Chiefs and the
Titans.
The Titans. I'm looking at my sheet and I'm looking at Oilers. The last time the Titans and the Chiefs played. 2018 wildcard game. Titans beat them by 1 point. You have a completely different set of teams this year with Mahomes and Tannehill at the respective helms. So I think it's going to be a shootout, personally.
And
high scoring.
Mike Vrabel, who's kind of quickly emerged during this playoff run as being a head coach of the future, obviously comes from the Bill Belichick tree branch, playing in New England. He outsmarted Bill Belichick in the first round, so student becomes master. Then he ends up taking down the Ravens. So I think they're going to throw some schemes at Mahomes that he might not be prepared for, and that game could be really close early.
Yeah.
But I think eventually Mahomes is going to figure it out. They're going to start putting up points, and it's going to force Tennessee to also chase the game in for points. So I think, like you said, Sean, it's going to get a little high scoring.
I think it will be. And, the last time that the first AFL championship was the Kansas City Chiefs versus the Houston Oilers, who went on to become the Tennessee Titans. So there's a little bit of history kind of happening with those two organizations in the playoffs.
So I assume you were a Rams fan when we had a team here in St. Louis, correct?
Yeah, I enjoyed the Super Bowl win. I was a fan then. I was a fan of some of those players. I lost interest in football before the Rams left, so that wasn't such a personal insult to me. But I was a fan at the time.
And Stuart, I know you're very proud of being from St. Louis. You're a proud, St. Louis Rams and proud St. Louis sports fan. So the question is, now that we don't have a team here in St. Louis, you probably, if you're a football fan, you still have to gravitate towards somebody. So does that mean you're automatically a Chiefs fan? So Sean, or have you found yourself compelled to start rooting for the Chiefs? Same to you, Stu?
No. I tend to not root for Kansas City teams, just historically. I don't. There was a time that I don't really feel that great about in my life when I was a Raiders fan. And so I hated the Chiefs. That was a long, long time ago. I was a different person then. Don't judge me. I'm not a big football fan anymore. And, it's funny because I see people on social media and they talk about, it's the Chiefs and the Titans. I don't like either team. But I guess I'm going to have to, you know what? You can not root for a team. You don't have to root for one of the teams. If you don't like the teams, if you don't follow them, if you're compelled to watch the game, that's great. Good for you. But you don't have to root for someone. I just want to kind of throw that out there. I don't know who needs to hear that, but you don't have to root for a team just because there's a game on.
Sure.
Maybe it makes it more fun for you. I don't know.
I think if the Chiefs weren't so entertaining, it'd be easier to not really attach yourself to them, but kind of like the Warriors where the exuberance with which they play was so infectious that you're just like, oh my God, I love watching the way they play. Yeah. There's a certain joy to the way Patrick Mahomes plays that you're almost compelled to like him.
I can be a fan of Patrick Mahomes, certainly, and root for him without being a fan of the Chiefs and rooting specifically for the Chiefs. I don't hope they lose, but I don't really care if they win.
Are you kind of in the same boat, Stu?
I like Mahomes and I like Kelsey. I think they won a lot of brownie points when they showed up wearing Blues jerseys in the playoffs last year. As an organization, the Chiefs voted for the Rams move, and then they put up billboards around the city within 2 weeks of the Rams moving saying Missouri's team. And I think that was a huge miscalculation by the Chiefs as an organization because it was no mystery that they voted in favor of the Rams moving. It just came across as very predatory. I think I hate the idea of people saying they're Missouri's team or just any team in general is blank state's team. Like if you're in southern Colorado, you have no real cultural ties to Denver. Why do you have to cheer for the Broncos? You're probably might be a New Mexico college football fan.
Sure.
So I think you kind of have those spheres of influence, and I think St. Louis isn't within Kansas City's sphere of influence. I don't fault anyone for cheering for the Chiefs now, but I don't think St. Louis as a whole really has become a Chiefs city, and I don't think it ever will, just because the two cities do have a big brother, little brother relationship. I've seen I generally keep track, and sometimes I write it down on the type of gear that I see around the city. And at least in South City, I've definitely seen an uptick in Chiefs gear since 2015, but I've seen a bigger uptick in Packers gear. And I would say that Packers have at least a large following here. Of course, there's a lot of Chicago transplants, a lot of people from Illinois who wear Bears gear, but I have a personal grudge against Kansas City sports teams, but I'm not going to hold my personal emotional grudge against people who cheer for the Chiefs. But
sure. I think you should, though. I really do.
Sports are about emotion, and emotions when it comes to sports aren't consistent. So I will admit I'm very hypocritical when it comes to sports. But sports are supposed to be fun. So
sure. Well, that gets me into my...
As long as you're not being a jerk to other people, you're not fighting them, you're not threatening them.
Sure. Well, that's a good segue, Stu. We've got about 4 minutes left, and I'd say the other big pressing matter, a lot of news broke yesterday, the scandal in baseball with the Houston Astros and the sign stealing. So we know the GM and the manager both got suspended for a year and then almost immediately got fired from the team. They lost first-round picks in a couple of years. They got fined $5 million. We expect Alex Cora from the Red Sox to get his decision announced at some point today and then probably get immediately fired. What are you guys' thoughts? You mentioned, Stu, passion in sports and things like that. Do you have a passionate opinion about, what the Astros did, if it was wrong, if the punishment was harsh enough? What are your thoughts on just the situation right now?
Yeah, so baseball has a long history with what we could say gamesmanship, which is where you try to get an advantage during the game. I mean, stealing signs by, second base or a player on second base and relaying it. Those are pretty normal things. They've been around the sport forever. I'd say most pitchers in the league right now use some sort of substance when they're pitching to kind of gain more control, more traction. That's an open secret around the league. I'd say those are both kind of gamemanship. What the Astros were doing goes beyond that. That's an advantage that the other team won't have since they can't set up a monitor in the away locker room. They can't set up a camera system. I don't like what the Astros did, and not just because I'm not a fan of that organization. I kind of still like the Astros.
Sean, are you upset at what they did? Do you think the punishment was enough?
I mean, at the end of the day, I wouldn't say I'm upset about it. I think that they should have been punished. There's a specific rule that says you're not allowed to use technology for that purpose, and they did it anyway, knowingly, willingly. I think they should get their World Series title stripped. So I don't think that they're punished enough, but ultimately, other teams have done this or something like it, and they just haven't been caught yet.
I'm on board with you that I think if you're going to make an example out of the Astros, you have to take the title from them in 2017. And I know that opens up another can of worms, and there's no good answer to it. But I think if you're going to set a precedent, you can't take half measures. You
Otherwise,
go all the way.
there's no deterrent there.
Right.
Someone else is going to do it again. And
Well, it happens in college, but just think about, this is a hypothetical situation. They revoke the Astros World Series victory and give it to the Dodgers. If I'm a Dodgers player, I'm talking to my agent immediately about getting that World Series bonus that's in my contract.
Well, I don't think you have to award it to the other team.
That's getting way in the weeds.
Yeah, I think you could just say it's a wash.
I agree.
Nobody won the title that year.
You don't award it that year.
Yeah.
Yeah, if this was college football, Alabama would absolutely claim that national title as theirs. If they were in the Dodgers situation, they would claim that title.
And I haven't heard enough about Altuve getting his MVP stripped. He won the MVP that year, and we know they've stripped MVPs in the past in baseball.
Yeah.
I can't see why he hasn't gotten or shouldn't get it taken away.
Yeah, the guy who should be really sweating bullets right now is Alex Cora, because
Yes.
Lunho's statement yesterday really threw him under the bus.
And everything you're hearing was he was the ringleader.
And
of the
almost
thing.
certainly will be suspended by the league and again probably fired by Boston if they're smart.
Yeah, and to your statement about hypocrisy, Stu, it opens up the whole thing with being in St. Louis. There's the Cardinals email scandal that happened, and it seems like there's more of an outrage around this versus that. And we might dig into that next week. We've only got about 20 seconds left, but that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, and a big part of hilarity on that, and I don't know if this is the time where I use my my overtime card, but Astros fans who were understandably outraged about Hackergate, seeing them get so upset and so defensive over this scandal, we all wear blinders to our own teams. That's what fan bases do. You love players on your teams and you hate them when you don't. But there's just a little bit of sweet justice seeing Astros fans who are just so angry at the Cardinals, 3 years ago, who are just, they can't see any wrongdoing at first. But I think they've kind of come around to, or at least they just stop talking and you take your blows and you move on.
Well, that'll do it for the second half. I actually am going to use my overtime card because there's one final topic that we didn't quite get to that I want to touch upon because I'm a pretty big fan of the sport. That's the UFC. They've got a big event this weekend on Saturday. Conor McGregor's returning to the octagon. Are either of you guys big into mixed martial arts or the UFC, or not really care?
I don't think it's a sport, so no.
Don't even think it's a sport.
I say that half jokingly. I'm just not interested in it. I don't think that watching two people beat the crap out of each other is interesting. There's certainly athleticism that's involved, which would imply a sport. These guys are definitely gonna probably come try to kick my butt for saying so, but I'm just not interested in it. And I don't mean I say it jokingly. I'm not trying to demean anything about it or what anyone who enjoys it.
So you a boxing fan at all?
Not really.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Maybe it's I don't know. Maybe it's just me. I've always been really big into boxing, and I appreciate the history.
You're not alone. There's
sure
hugely popular.
McGregor said yesterday on an ESPN interview he stands to make about $80 million from this fight. We know he made between 85 and 100 when he fought Floyd Mayweather. So there's obviously a lot of money being generated through the UFC and mixed martial arts and McGregor. So he's not enough of a – to me, he's probably the biggest, most marketable fighter in the world across boxing, MMA, whatever right now. For me, he's an obvious guy that's a lightning rod to get you to watch the sport. But I guess from a casual standpoint, you still probably wouldn't be compelled to watch McGregor fight.
Probably not. But I will say it's interesting. Is there a more famous fighter that's still active? I would almost say McGregor's more infamous. Which
that's a good point.
Maybe that is enough to get some casual fans or people who aren't normally interested. I have not enough time.
He's found a way to provoke people into having an opinion about him one way or the other through some of his antics in and out of the cage.
I won't be rooting for the fight, but my interest is watching McGregor lose. He's the perfect heel for MMA. It's unfortunately for me as a casual, MMA has such a high barrier of entry compared to other sports. I don't go into watch parties. I'm not going to pay-per-view on it. If I'm at the bar when the fight's going down, I'll watch it. But otherwise, I'll watch clips or I'll find a pirated stream somewhere.
I used to be very into mixed martial arts in the UFC, and I've sort of a kid will change the way you can watch a 9:00 Saturday pay-per-view fight, but
do anything for that matter. Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah, so I don't know if I'll be compelled to fork out $60 for the pay-per-view fight, but I used to find myself doing that. And McGregor's the type of guy that, like, Stu, to your point, you either want to see him get beaten up or you want to watch him do the beating up. And obviously he's embraced being from Ireland, and there's a large contingent of Irish Americans who get really swept up in him. And on the flip side, a lot of people who find how braggadocious he is off-putting, and they kind of want to see him, get shut up to a point. What surprises me is that oftentimes people kind of don't give mixed martial arts the credit it should deserve for being a safer sport than boxing, and that's a whole other argument. And also, it's much more technical than just – you might have this image of mixed martial arts as two guys going in a cage and just throwing fists, but the sport's evolved since the days of, like, Hoist Gracie and those guys back in the 90s. These guys are supreme athletes. You look at like a George St. Pierre, Demetrius Johnson, Anderson Silva. These are high-level athletes that could compete in any sport that just happened to be in, mixed martial arts. And it's really the next evolution of collegiate wrestling. You see a lot of collegiate wrestlers go into this sport, and Muay Thai fighters in kickboxing. It's really a much more technical, graceful sport than just two guys going in a cage and just throwing fists. So I think for people who don't give the UFC enough credit, you should kind of re-look at the situation, because it's actually a much more advanced sport than you want to give it credit for.
Yeah, and I will say that's one of the most interesting things about MMA is how there's many different styles of fighting, and how two fighters approach each other, different styles of martial arts that they use, ground game, how it's implemented, and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not a huge MMA guy, but I definitely appreciate it. But I do find it interesting that as someone who's so opposed to fighting and hockey is such a big boxing and
that's a great point.
An MMA guy.
I'm glad you touched upon it. We only have 30 seconds left. I will address that in the future, but to quickly answer that, there's something about two guys getting in a sanctioned fight and agreeing to each other, hey, we're going to have a bout, and it's for money, and it's also a sport, as opposed to hockey, where a lot of times those things aren't always just two guys agreeing to it, and it's outside of the realm of that particular sport.
Cassian.
Yeah, Cassian Kachuk. But it is funny, Stu, that I do have a bloodlust for mixed martial arts and not so much in the NHL. Okay, so that'll do it for the 5-minute overtime. One quick segment we're going to go through now. It's a new segment that we initiated last week. It's going to be our food for thought for the week. So it's something that maybe you've been thinking about all week that you just haven't been able to kind of forget about, and you want to get off your chest. It can be in the sports world. It can be in the pop culture world. So, Sean, do you have a food for thought you want to talk about?
Yeah, I'm so glad that we're doing this now, because I've been looking at my sheet the whole time thinking, man, I need to get this in there. We talked a little bit about last week. Justin Bieber, who, if some of you might not know, is apparently a singer or something. I think he's from Canada, so he plays hockey. Anyway, he has challenged Jordan Binnington, the Blues Stanley Cup champion goaltender, to a friendly for charity type
challenged
thing.
him.
Binnington challenged him. Okay, well, even better. I think the Biebs will score on Binnington. You can quote me on that.
Wow.
I think he will score. I don't know what the setup will be. Obviously, it's not been determined. Like, is he going to have like 4 shots or whatever? If it's 1 shot, probably not. But I think if they let him take more than 1, the Biebs will score.
So do you think that Binnington's not that good of a goalie, or do you think Bieber's like an underrated hockey player?
I think despite my love for the St. Louis Blues, I would love to see either one of these guys absolutely embarrassed in front of a public crowd. So, take that for what you will. I don't know. Maybe I'm just deranged.
Okay.
That's mine. That's mine.
That's your food for thought. How about you, Stu? Do you have a food for thought you've been thinking about this week that you want to kind of get off your chest?
One that I've been thinking about for a while is I'm just going to say that the future of the Cardinals position at catcher, I will say a person of Molina's stature, in my opinion, should decide how long he wants to play. And I think that means that he'll probably play for a couple more years. So we'll be losing another catching prospect pretty soon, I'm pretty sure. But that's my food for thought, is Yachty decides when he hangs him up for good.
I like that. Dan, you've been kind of quietly sitting by, throwing in some comments here and there on the producer's role. Do you have any food for thought you wanted to quickly talk about?
No.
I know you're a huge Rush fan. Maybe that gives you...
Oh, it's going to make me sad.
Yeah, okay. Okay, well, we'll leave it there. And if you're listening, Neil Peart passed away on Friday. Dan is our resident Rush hardcore fan, and there were a lot of really cool tributes in the sports world and really across the music world for Neil. So good opportunity to get back into Rush if you are a casual fan, a hardcore fan. Great opportunity to dig into their discography.
Absolutely.
My food for thought is it's something that I didn't think that was that strange until I started talking to people around the office about it. So I'm going to ask Stuart and Sean, are you familiar with the term posterize? And I can tell by the look that is an easy no.
Nope.
Okay. As a huge basketball fan, I thought that term was just a part of the sports lexicon, and clearly it's just unique to basketball. But the term posterize is, if you remember back in the day when you were a kid, you'd get those posters of Jordan and Hakeem and all these guys doing dunks, and often there was a guy that was being dunked on that looked really silly and was therefore embarrassed for life for being posterized. And it's a term that happens in the NBA. Anytime a guy does a dunk, he posterizes a guy, and you'll see a lot of defenders sidestep out of the lane to avoid ending up on a poster.
Not on that shot.
So I was watching Conor McGregor the other night against Toronto, and he embarrassed multiple people on one play. And I thought to myself, I've never seen a hockey player in my whole life who is so skilled and superior to everyone else at a professional level that he is posterizing these goalies and these defenders on a nightly basis. And I feel like that term posterize should come out of the NBA bubble and find its way over into hockey, because McDavid is the most talented player I've ever seen with my eyes. And I'm not saying he's going to be Wayne Gretzky. I'm not saying he's going to be Sidney Crosby yet. But in terms of just an athletic standpoint, I've never seen a guy who looks like he's playing a video game and holding down the turbo button against everyone else. And, it blows me away what he does on a nightly basis.
I love the term, and I'm going to use it. I'll be looking for someone getting posterized in every game I watch from now on.
Please do. I found some Google pictures of Conor McDavid posterizing. I'll post those online because they're really great. And there's always the same look from the defender, which is this: he's reaching out with his stick, he's trying for a poke check, and he has a look on his face of desperation, knowing this guy just accelerated past him at an ungodly speed. So let's take that posterized word and put it into all of sports and not just basketball. So that's my food for thought.
Love it.
So we're going to step away really quickly for 60 seconds. We're going to come back and wrap up with our break room battle, so don't go anywhere.
This is Emily from Office Essentials. Did you know that germs on hands can be transferred up to 7 times, making frequently touched surfaces in the office hotspots for viruses? And a virus can spread through an entire office in just a few hours. Some germs can even live for days on hard surfaces. So hotspots like door handles, keyboards, light switches, desktops, and even elevator buttons should be cleaned even more often. And don't forget about the kitchen. Break rooms have some of the germiest surfaces in the entire office. Sink faucets, microwaves, and refrigerator handles too. Office Essentials can help you protect your office from sickness this flu season. Right now at stlofficesupplies.com, we're offering a free printable poster that you can print and hang around your office. It contains tips to help coworkers prevent the spread of the flu. Office Essentials is your hometown supplier of all the office supplies and furniture you need to run and grow your business. Learn more today at stlofficesupplies.com.
All right, well, thanks for sticking around for this final segment. We're going to get into our weekly break room battle. This usually comes from one of the questions in conversation over the last hour. Sean brought something great to the table that we thought was perfect with the All-Star game coming up in St. Louis. So the question we're going to pose, and we're going to have this on Twitter, Facebook, and our break room here at Office Essentials, if Justin Bieber gets 5 breakaway opportunities against Jordan Binnington, will he score on one of those 5 attempts? Sean, you say adamantly he will score.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, Stuart, really quickly, yes or no, will he score 5 attempts?
I thought it was out of 10, yes. Out of 5, I give him a middling chance.
So that's a no. I'm going to say a no on Stu. Dan, how about you?
Oh, that's a big fat no from me.
And that's a no for me too. So that's 3 no's to Sean's 1 yes. From what I'm hearing, there's a chance that this could take place in the offseason, potentially. They've both kind of agreed to it, and they're just kind of ironing out. So we could have a real answer to this in the future. So please go on our Facebook, go on our Twitter page. That will do it for this week's episode. Be sure to tell your friends if you like what you heard. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss an episode. We'll be back again next week.
Listen to some Rush.